The driver's recovered and the truck is towed out, but Scully has an amazing revelation. The driver has the same symptoms that George and the girl had, except this is not a communicable disease. And this Yakov-Smirnov condition is incredibly rare. 3 people in the same small town having it is a statistical impossibility. However, one way that they could have gotten it is if George's body was dropped into the grinder, fed to the chickens, which were in turn eaten by those people. But if that was the cause of it, why is it only happening in this small town? Of course, there's a little something else that they can't help but notice about the state of this river. So unless Moses showed up to tell Chaco Chicken to let his people go, it looks like the factory is dumping a whole hell of a lot of crap in this river. Apparently that's perfectly all right, though. The only concern that Mulder has is that there might be something in there, like George's body. Well, they hit the mother lode, the skeletal remains of 9 people with more on the way. And one of them is definitely George.
The pin in his femur. According to his medical file, Kearns broke his right leg 4 years ago.
Damn, when I brought up about busting a hip earlier, I had no idea that my joke was actually a plot point. Mulder has looked into it and found close to 90 people who have disappeared in this area in the last half century. And he has a theory. Cannibals. Yep. As anyone with Yakov-Smirnov condition will tell you, in your country, you eat Chaco chicken. But in Arkansas, Chaco chicken eat you. Mulder says that groups practice cannibalism in some instances out of a belief that it stops the aging process, to explain what's happening here. And it's another time where Mulder says things that are a bit dubious. First, because cannibalism is a very grim part of all world history, especially in times of war. World War II, for instance, which not all that long ago, saw large-scale cannibalism taking place, regardless of culture or nationality. Desperate, starving people seeing a person who is dead and, to be clinical about it, and merely protein being allowed to go to waste, do what they have to survive. And even then, there were cases of soldiers killing prisoners or civilians, or prisoners killing each other, for the express purpose of eating them. And again, we're not talking that long ago in history. This is an aberration, certainly. Almost nobody wanted to do it. But it has frequently occurred throughout human history. And yet these tales from outside Europe were exaggerated in places to salve the consciences of people because of colonialism. We're doing them a favor by stopping them from killing and eating each other. So the degree to which cannibalism was prevalent around the world is in dispute. Even in the case of the Anasazi, whom Mulder name-drops specifically and is the source of the name Chaco, no doubt. Even archaeologists debate whether or not the physical evidence that they have found are necessarily signs of cannibalism, or if it's just signs of a witch hunt, which in the local culture necessitated mutilating the body in a way that can leave evidence that looks similar to cannibalism. And Mulder's assertion about it being connected to longevity is dubious, to say the least. I don't claim to be an anthropology expert, but my research turned up exactly one group who believed in it for such purposes. And his other points are even more questionable. Vampirism, the history of which does not conform to this idea at all, and Catholicism, which, if you're willing to be honest, you have to admit is no more related to cannibalism than the hokey pokey is a form of martial arts. Of course, this being the X-Files, Mulder is naturally right about everything, and Mr. Chaco himself is right in the middle of this. The townsfolk are naturally anxious, and Dolores, George's wife, is in on the plot but is losing it. She finally calls up Mulder in desperation, so Mulder sends Scully there alone to go and pick her up because she's afraid for her life, that she's in danger from Mr. Chaco. Mulder's not going because he's taking Mr. Chaco into custody, which is a foolish thing that he's doing only because the plot requires it. At that very moment, Mulder and Scully had been trying to compare the birth records against the personnel files to see if these people really have stopped aging, only to discover a recent arson has destroyed those records, and nobody has mentioned it. So not only does this mean that they have no evidence backing this up, it also means that somebody in some official capacity is keeping this quiet. Which means that right now, Mulder and Scully can trust no officials in this town because there's no idea of which one was the one who did it. And yet, rather than calling for support from various federal or state agencies, He's planning to not only leave both himself and Scully with no one to watch their backs, but in doing so, allow the one person willing to talk to them to be put in danger so he can go alone to try to take a man into custody when he can't even trust the local sheriff and technically doesn't even have a reason to pick the guy up. There's nothing pointing to him other than what Dolores just said to him on the phone, and you can't pick somebody up simply because they've been accused of something. The only result of this is that Scully is kidnapped, again, and dragged to where the cult is already eating Dolores. Mulder spends this time over at Chaco's place, discovering evidence that the guy was shot down over New Guinea in World War II and has barely aged since then based upon pictures. Continuing his winning streak, Mulder picks up some kind of relic, could be a priceless antique for all he knows, and uses it to batter the lock off of a chest, which does in fact contain severed human heads. I'll give him that. But since it did not have human head cupboard stamped on the front of it, I'm pretty sure he didn't have legal cause to do that. Am I the only one starting to wonder if the reason that Mulder keeps running into career trouble is not a conspiracy, but the fact he does not know the basics of how law enforcement is supposed to work? You just found evidence that this man is a serial killer, and none of it can be used because you're an impulsive dumbass. It's Chaco himself that actually drags Scully over to the Donner Party and makes it clear how unhappy he is over what they did to Dolores, leading to yet another unintentionally hilarious moment as he tries to appeal to the moral decency of a cult of cannibals. To the surprise of no one, this ends with him being beheaded next, with Scully soon to follow, but Mulder shoots the Axeman, who turns out to be the sheriff, and everyone scatters, trampling the guy who runs the plant before he can shoot Mulder with Chaco's revolver. Yes, that's right. The only one who showed up armed was the guy who was not invited to the party. Why would they be armed? That's ridiculous. Two groups that you never associate with guns are murder cults or the South, right? That's it. Let's just get out of here. Our Town gets a stamp of watchable. I know that the X-Files developed certain tropes and certainly over its long run would make use of some things repeatedly, but nevertheless Our Town feels like it's someone doing a joke-free parody of the show. Accepting the dubious claims obviously comes with the territory here. I'm not quibbling about that. It's the fact that it's plot by numbers, highly questionable law enforcement behavior, and just frequently makes little sense. For example, you're telling me that a white man winds up stranded on an island of cannibals that specialize in eating outsiders, and they teach their ways to him rather than the more obvious eating him that should have happened. Likewise, the ending is shutting down the chicken plant, which I don't see as any kind of particular victory because, while many members of the cult worked there certainly, shutting down the plant doesn't stop them from being cannibals. On the contrary, you have provided even less chickens for them to eat, haven't you? And yeah, 3 of the higher-ups in this cult are now dead, but do you honestly think that the rest are going to stop when they've had a half-century of eternal youth? If anything, all this will do is cause them to now spread out to other towns. Unless there's some kind of ritual involved, of course. We don't know because the episode openly says it's not going to bother explaining with how its idiot plot works. But since we've established that the world of the X-Files is one where both super science and magic happens, I guess you're expected to just decide for yourself what is the least stupid explanation for all of this. The inspiration for this episode came as a result of research on the Anasazi tribe because it would play an important role in the season finale, titled Anasazi, which we'll be getting to in our next review of the X-Files.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!